I want to ask some questions around specific sensors and data points. And I guess I'd start at a high level and get your opinions on what are requisites, data collection points required to gain valuable process analytics that are just absolutely requisite. What sensors or data points are fundamental? Big, wide open question. But Barrett, let's start with you.
I mean, besides the obvious, you got your pH, DO, CO2, biomass, some of your waste products like your lactate, glucose, those are a must. I'm seeing more and more, IgG monitoring. I'm seeing more, like I mentioned earlier, chip-based, full amino acid monitoring. I know as you're characterizing your process, there are certain, depending on your media system that you're using, there are certain things that will deplete right away, and having that ability to monitor them and catch them before the cells change their metabolism is a huge benefit, for sure. It was just off the top of my head. For downstream, obviously, additionally. Oh, for downstream, I'd just say, obviously, the pH conductivity, things like that. It'd be nice if we had the ability to monitor kind of qualitative protein characteristics downstream, that we don't have quite that ability just yet. I wish we did. But yeah, off the top of my head, those are must-haves.
Yeah. Paul, did I hear you were going to chime in there at all?
No, I don't think I would have anything to add beyond what Barrett just provided.
All right, good. No, I didn't hear if I thought I heard some noise coming from your end, but that's good. We're gonna ask the audience now. Polling question number 3 on this topic of sensors. Which advanced sensors are you interested in for process control? Viable biomass, Raman spectroscopy. Having trouble with my words today. Glucose, lactate, foam, off gas, at-line HPLC, or other. And while we're collecting those responses, Barrett, you just mentioned, a couple of things on your downstream wish list. So this question kind of rolls into that or aligns with it. What other options are there now or maybe in the immediate future? So Barrett, maybe you can look into your crystal ball and tell us what you see coming down the pike.
Well, I mean, I know the offline analytics that we had to do and they're all HPLC based for a lot of these these sugars that I keep bringing up constantly, it seems, for this talk. If there's a way that can be shortened and reduced, maybe, there's a lot of things that are now becoming chip based. You can design custom assays that will monitor specific glycans if you would like. And I know there are vendors that are working with people on that. So you can do rapid analysis of your protein quality. So that's one that I would love to see soon. So yeah, if I were to take a crystal ball, knowing that assay, at least when it was in our hands, we could turn it around, in an afternoon. If we can get that reduced and make it specific, I think that's something that could be very valuable to advance at least the downstream. Into continuous.
Miles, let's take a look at what the audience said there. At-line HPLC is the runaway.
Yep.
We'll have to. There've been a couple questions with other as a choice. We're gonna have to look into the written responses and see what those other choices look like. Let's turn to a couple of audience questions if you guys are game. Continuous manufacturing and vaccine production. It's a pretty general question from Tonga. How effective will continuous manufacturing be in vaccine production? So let me expand on that just real quick. Are there special considerations around continuous in vaccine production? Obviously, it seems like a ripe area for continuous, given production volume. Just curious, Barrett, let's start with you since you're on my screen. What's the role of continuous and how effective will it be in vaccines?
Well, aside from, I think, supply, right? I mean, it's supply and high quality to meet the needs, right? I mean, we just went through, this pandemic thing, which we're still, I suppose, in. and it's all about supply. So, if we're able to do continuous for, especially for vaccines, it's only going to improve, your consistency, your qualitative. It's going to be higher quality. It's going to be consistently made, and it's going to be a continuous supply. So it kind of ticks all the boxes, especially when there's extremely high demand for these kind of global circumstances. So I definitely think there is a place for it for sure.
You mentioned supply, and it's an interesting point. I've got a follow-up for you both on, as it relates to the implementation, like as it relates to pretty much anything that biopharmaceutical companies have been doing or looking to do for the past 2 going on 3 years. Supply has been a concern at every turn, whether it's consumables, single use, raw materials, APIs. It goes supply of for clinical stage companies, supply of a clinical patient base. I mean, supply has been challenging at every turn. Has that been, or is it the case in terms of the adoption of some of this continuous technology as well, and where if that supply is concerning? Paul, any thoughts on that? Like as it relates to KKNA's adoption of new technologies around PAT and continuous, has the supply chain impacted those efforts?
So the product supply that we've had has been contiguous. I'm fortunate to say we have had no disruptions. In terms of the technology that we're adopting further upstream from a manufacturing perspective, either with current commercial product or some of the development and or research that we've had earlier on, those elements that you kind of referenced, no challenge from our perspective. Now, we've got a couple of tech transfer items that are, maybe a step slower than we might have liked. And, there's some focus issues throughout our chains in the U.S. Defense Production Act, some of those sorts of activities. But I mean, from a technology adoption perspective, I'm not sure that I've seen any disruption of the type that I think you asked about specifically.
Yeah. Follow up for on that for you, Paul, and then Barrett, I want to get your perspective as well. But Paul, you mentioned earlier that some of the, I guess, boots level activity around PAT and continuous adoption at KKNA happens either by way of or in partnership with your outsourcing partners, obviously. Give us some sense around the without maybe without naming who your outsourcing partners are, if it's a less than glowing review, but give us some sense for like sort of the push pull, I guess, initiative between sponsor company and outsourcer in terms of the adoption of these technologies. Paul, you've ascertained at a couple points during this conversation that speed to market is obviously first and foremost in a VP level tech ops supply chain guy's mind. That being said, how much of your adoption or movement towards continuous is keeping those outsourcers honest and vigorously moving forward versus them coming back to you and saying, we're on this, like we're on the leading edge, we're doing everything we can?
Yeah, I mean, so hopefully the other thing that I've presented this morning is that a lot of these decisions are so far upstream, right? So if we're just trying to do something from a commercial perspective, relative to the process change as we're later in the game, well, then that's obviously going to create some challenges for us. That tech transfer, at least for my products right now, that tech transfer would be pretty hard to justify because the volumes are a little bit smaller. Maybe that changes in the future, but we'll have to see. But I think the way we like to do it is all the way back to research, and then as research turns into early phase development, well, what's the strategy? How are we going to achieve the target product profile? And then how are the variables associated with the process parameters, like we've been talking? How are we going to control those items? and let's put a strategy together. And when we make that product internally, we put a strategy together. And when we do that externally, we try to work with whoever we're working with from a development perspective to do the same sort of strategic thinking. So it's not so much, oh, well, I'm going to show up after we go commercial and kind of push the CMO to do something differently from a process management perspective. That's a little bit, frankly, it's a little bit too late in terms of the economic life cycle of the product. But we always try to go as early as possible, because again, all of this, A, it takes a ton of time, B, it takes a ton of money. And C, in a lot of cases, like the justification for just the implementation of science, it's not entirely helpful for the business nor the patient.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. Barrett, I want to get back to that supply chain question, give you an opportunity to respond. In the event that some of your clients are not in as fortunate a position as KKNA has been in terms of access to supply, are you seeing efforts to move the needle forward on PAT and continuous affected by supply chain constraints?
I am still seeing movement. The nature of being a consultant, you work with lots of different companies, most of which are often smaller companies that are, just kind of Series A, B funded companies. And so, I do have a few that are looking to do that. And as Paul mentioned earlier, they're starting early and they're establishing those things in their QTPP and all those CQAs right off the bat. And they're identifying CMO partners that are willing to do that. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is finding the right CMO that's willing to basically partner with you and do this. And that to me is the biggest challenge, especially for these small to medium-sized companies that don't necessarily have access to an abundance of funds. But yeah, I think finding the right partner is critical. And it's one that's willing to work with you and partner with you, be that either vendors or your CMO partners, or both.